great to be coming to you guys and hopefully bringing some awesome content to your audience. So for those people who don't know who I am, my name is Goossens and I'm the co-founder of Wildhorn Capital. We are a multifamily acquisition firm based in Austin, Texas. My business partner is Andrew Campbell. You might have heard about him as well. And my whole story, my shtick is that I moved to this country in 2012, about 8 years ago. And I came here really just to live and work in New York City as an expat and to chase a girl. And that girl ended up turning into be my wife, which is, all a fairy tale ending. And but quickly realized when I moved to the United States, the barriers to entry into the US market is a lot lower compared to where I'm from. And over the past 8 years, my background's in structural engineering, but I use that structural engineering degree to get me into some work for a big real estate developer here in Los Angeles, is where I live. And then I also kept building out my side hustle and buying deals in Austin, Texas, and in San Antonio. And over the period of the last 5 years, we've grown it to about 2,000 units, about $250 million assets under management, and I've been able to achieve financial freedom along the way. And I don't say that to boast. I say that to sort of inspire people to, if I can move, halfway across the world or 10,000 miles and give it a go and give it a crack and achieve what I've done, then the average American can as well. And I'm really here to inspire those people to get off the fence, start taking action, and realize what is in your own backyard, because there's some pretty cracking, as I like to say, investment opportunities that you may not see. And it takes someone from outside the US to show you maybe what you've got laying around in your backyard. So yeah, that's a little bit about who I am.
Awesome. Yeah, excited to have you here, Reed. If you could you walk us through your very first deal? How'd you get started, and what did that first deal look like?
Yeah, so my first deal, just to quickly rewind the clock a little bit. So before moving to the United States, I'd spent a bit of time traveling around the world and was back in Australia. So I moved to the US in 2012, but in 2010, I returned back to Australia after working abroad. I worked in London for the preparation of the 2012 Olympic Games in 2008, 2009, returned to Australia in 2010. And that's really where this passion or not passion, but sort of this desire to not work in a cubicle for the next 40 years of my life really started to eat away at me. I really felt like this person who was sitting on the sidelines, watching his life, watching my life go by. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners today in the webinar can resonate with that, working in a cubicle and just going, is this it? Like, is this all I've signed up for the next 40, 50 years of my life? And through that, little twinge of curiosity, I stumbled across the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that's where that was the fire to ignite within my belly to start down the real estate investment path. And I then began my real estate education journey in 2010. Prior to coming to the United States, I was going to do something in Aussie. I'd saved up a bit of money, working in the corporate world, but then decided to move, halfway across the world to chase a girl and spend half of my money that I saved, moving to the United States. But when I got to the US, so I'd already had the bug when I got here. And then about 2 weeks being fresh off the boat in New York City, I was at my first RIA event, the Real Estate Investment Associations. And for all those people listening out there, we don't have that level of tapestry of communities of different RIAs around MSAs here in the United States, major metropolitans that have these groups of real estate professionals that come together. And I was so blown away with the organization of this group and the information that was readily available at my fingertips by paying $20 at the door. And so through that, I started attending those events, and then I quickly realized that there's secondary, tertiary markets here in the United States. And I happened to live in New York City. Obviously, I couldn't afford to buy in New York City. Being fresh off the boat, I didn't have any credit. I didn't even know what a credit score was. But I did quickly realize that there was some pretty incredible opportunities that you could buy for less than $50,000. And coming from Australia, you couldn't buy anything for $50,000 in Australia. So the money I had saved, I think at that point I'd saved about $30,000 or $40,000. I bought my first triplex, all cash, for $38,000 in upstate New York. And the only reason I chose upstate New York was Syracuse, was because I could get on a Greyhound bus and it would take me 4 hours to get up there. I would have a bit of a tour on a Saturday. I'd catch the bus back down on a Saturday afternoon and make sure I was back in the bar having a few drinks with my girlfriend and the lads, so I could do it all in one day. And that was really the only reason. And I bought that triplex, really a bit of a fresh-eyed, bushy-tailed Australian, not understanding Section 8 housing, but it got me going, right? It was the point of the fact that I'd been educating myself for about 2.5 years at that point, and I knew that I wouldn't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1. And that was super important to me. And for me, it was, I got to the analysis paralysis stage. I remember vividly standing on the subway, reading, all these books about, underwriting deals and small triplexes and duplexes. But I just needed to get going, right? I needed to jump off the deep end. And I knew I couldn't just keep spinning my wheels. So for me, I came to that decision of like, well, I've got some money saved. It's my money. I've done enough research now. I've done enough underwriting of deals. I'm getting comfortable with the different risks. I'm willing to put my money at risk. It's no one else's money, it's mine. And remember, I didn't get any debt on this first deal because didn't qualify. So that first deal was really about just getting off the mark. And I had a pretty good education in Section 8 housing, to say the least.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I can definitely relate to the analysis paralysis. I have an engineering background too, and so I have a tendency to analyze the heck out of everything. But wanted to, I guess, just kind of in general, you talked about your first deal, but if you could kind of talk about your first multifamily deal and
Sure.
and then why Texas, why Austin, why San Antonio.
Yeah, so the first deal I was involved with came through a series of events that happened through conversations with other people, and this is a theme that all the people in this webinar are trying to surround themselves with people they aspire to be. And so again, it's a bit of a story, but I wanted to get to this point of like, when I was in New York City, I bought the deal number 1. That got me to deal number 2. I then was doing a flip in Philadelphia, but I was still working full time, still grinding. And then in 2014, I made the shift back to LA, which is where my wife is from. And in that transition, I also realized I needed to get a coach, a mentor. And I chose a mentor that had only just done one deal. He was only getting started. I didn't want to spend $10,000-$20,000, but I needed someone in my corner, because I knew that I needed to take my investing career to the next level. And so by going out and getting a mentor and paying for a mentor, and I only paid, I think, $2,500, which is, might not seem like a lot of money, but it's still, it's money, right? But what it was is the act of investing in yourself and saying, I'm worth this money and I'm worth paying someone to be in my corner. And that means that you're taking yourself seriously, you're taking a bet on yourself. And that's the most important thing you can do. And hopefully you can take away from this webinar is that you start betting on yourself, because you can't bet on anyone else. If you can't bet on anyone else, if you can't bet on yourself, who the hell can you bet on, right? And so through that transition into LA, I started a meetup group in downtown Los Angeles. And through that, I met a gentleman, and to remain anonymous. And he was an underwriter for a multifamily acquisition team based in Los Angeles, but they were looking at deals in Texas. And he knew he wanted to get out of the rat race. He wanted to start his own business. And I had got this mentor, and he and I, this gentleman who was come to my meetup event, had started underwriting a bunch of deals in Houston. And I was already interested in the Texas market at that stage because of the moderate cap rates compared to, say, LA or New York. And through that, he found this really smoking hot deal in 2014, a 2000 build. It was a 7 cap. And he was still working full time. I was still working as a structural engineer. And, I learned a bit of underwriting from him, but through those conversations and through meeting him through my meetup event, he was like, I'm going to offer on this deal. I think it's a really smoking hot deal. And I knew enough about real estate at that time to know that it was a smoking hot deal. And he's like, well, I can't raise the money. And I said, well, I've got this mentor who apparently can raise money. Let's go chat with him, And I approached him, and my mentor was like, oh, I don't feel confident, or I don't know. He said no originally. I don't really understand why. And I went back to my mate and I said, look, I don't think he's really interested, but he's like, man, I really like this deal. Can you push him again? So I went back again, and ultimately I introduced those two blokes, and they've gone off to start a huge multifamily firm called Ashcroft Capital. And it was really through doing that first deal. And I was just the introductory piece. I raised a little bit of money on that deal. But everyone involved ultimately in that deal, we did everything we could to get the money raised. I think it was about $3.5 or $4 million. And it was just, it was one of those things that you look back and it was sort of like a blur of like how it all came together. But it was a couple of things came out of it. One was that I quickly realized that my network that I thought I was going to raise a bunch of money from didn't really exist. And it's sort of it was a cold shower and understanding how much you need to invest in educating your investors and grow your investor database. And that's where I'd already started my own podcast at that stage, or was on the road to starting my own podcast and tell my story. But in order to grow my network, and at the time when this first deal came about, I think I had 50 people on my email list, and I thought to myself, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to easily be able to raise $500,000, maybe even $1 million, on this first deal. And I remember approaching 50 people, and everyone, I only was able to sit down with 4 people to have a conversation about it, and only 2 ended up investing. And so it was just a real cold shower of like how you think your network is only as good as when you have a live deal. And everyone says, oh yeah, I'd love to invest in your deals when you get one under contract, and when you do eventually have one, it's funny how quickly they scatter like cockroaches. In terms of my money's not here, or there's another excuse. But really, it was a reflection of how I, as a person, trying to be a key person of influence in my little sphere, how I wasn't doing a good enough job cultivating and educating people on what I was trying to do. Because at this stage, I was still a structural engineer. This is 2014, and so trying to change the perception of who I am, and that they can trust me, right? And that's the big thing. They didn't have the trust in me, because people invest in me and you first and foremost, and the deals actually is secondary. And so that was a really big, important lesson to learn out of that first deal, that you have to really focus on building your network, constantly building your investor database, in order to get people prepped and ready when you do have a live deal, that they know exactly what to expect and they can jump on it straight away. So I'll stop there, but that was sort of the first deal to come to fruition back in 2014.